Hi, and welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, the podcast where revenue leaders and sales comp experts share strategies for driving performance. Today, we're breaking from our usual format to bring you a special live episode from a recent session featuring leaders Dr. Robert Bieshaar, the go-to-market performance management at Autodesk, and Dennis Johnson, the Chief Financial Officer at Qlik. With teams running lean, many are now rethinking how they plan, pay, and operate. But true sales performance excellence takes more than speed. It takes total alignment across quota design, incentive strategy, and execution. In this conversation, former AI's Shawn Rossi, Vice President of Strategic Services, explores what this looks like in practice inside enterprise orgs from the leaders who've achieved it. We hope you enjoy.
Thanks, everybody, for your time today. Looking forward to a good discussion. Hopefully, we'll have some good takeaways, learn a little bit, maybe laugh a little bit here and there. We'll see what happens. But just by way of introduction, I'm Shawn Rossi. I have had the opportunity to collaborate with companies for about 30 years on looking at optimizing plan designs for the sales team, quota, territories, jobs, et cetera. And I'm part of Forma's AI's leadership team and head up the strategic services team. With that said, I'd like to introduce both Robert and Dennis before we get started. Everybody's busy, including the audience, so thank you as well. But Robert?
Thank you, Shawn. So my name is Robert Bieshaar. At Autodesk, I'm responsible for go-to-market performance management, which in essence is all internal sales comp, all partner sales comp, role strategy. So those are the key hobbies that we carry. Dennis?
And my name is Dennis Johnson. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Qlik. We are a provider of data analytics and data management solutions. I've been with the company for about 16 years. And in my role, obviously work very closely with our go-to-market team, sales operations, and our sales compensation team in terms of design and administration of our comp plans here at Qlik.
So that being said, just a quick tee up to start and get the terminology and juices flowing, so to speak. When we think about defining what good looks like from a sales performance management perspective, we like to think of it in terms of a pyramid and where you spend your time. And really, when you get to best in class, we like to say you flip the pyramid. So if you look at the bottom, some of the key activities are just the basic blocking and tackling of motivating your sales organization through good administration, which means you've got to be able to pay accurately, on time. You got to give in-period reports for them to understand, and then end-of-period reports to really complete the trust cycle and really, basically fulfill that contract between we want you to do this and we'll reward you for that. You do it, you get it. If you do better, we give you more. If you do less, then obviously you don't get as much. And that's the meets minimum. And a lot of companies get stuck in the cycle of that before they can evolve up, because we view it as a journey to say, that's all looking back, if you will. If you start looking through the windshield or the headlights, if you will, then you can really get where we think, in our opinion, sales performance management excellence is, which is affecting outcomes that are about to happen and moving the needle. So what that means is really focusing in on engaging the key stakeholders across the business, so you become an expert in the business and how your quota, comp plans, and territories help propel the results and really achieve those results. And you can also, as you see some of the key outcomes out here, help with coaching, so people can, the first line managers especially, get to win their hearts and mind and give them the data and the actionable items to say, okay, how can I improve performance? Because especially today's world, with there's a lot of AI, a lot of metrics, et cetera, there's a lot of noise. And a coach, you measure something and you can manage it. That's great. But a coach takes it and prioritizes what needs to happen and helps you improve your performance and take some of that noise out. So when we try and say, what does it actually look like? It really is living and spending most of your time at the top of the pyramid, not the bottom. And it's a journey. And what we want to talk about today is, does everybody on the line agree with that vision and what it defines? And talk about the evolution, the journey, and the improvements and some of the lessons learned to get to flipping the pyramid. So that's a little bit about what we view in terms of what good looks like, but we'd love to throw it out. Dennis, Robert, what are your thoughts on the model? What good looks like, et cetera, from your point of view?
So one of the things that are key to a successful comp plan, and basically also determining later on if it's effective or not, is actually having a corporate strategy that the comp plan is supposed to support. It's usually not mentioned in the pyramid because we have a lot of operational tasks that actually weigh heavy on us, and we tend to focus on those more. But I think the key starting point is, what is your corporate strategy? What is your product strategy? What is your sales strategy? What is your role strategy? Okay, now let's define the comp plan based on what those things are going to be. Once that is established, or you have a comp plan and it's agreed on overall, comes the next sort of complexity, which is everything from territory setup, seller assignment, ratios, and then, as every CFO may confirm, getting the quotas right. So it not only fulfills that the sellers have a challenging but achievable target, and the company goals from a financial perspective are achieved as well. Because I said the first part that I mentioned drives a strategy, i.e., you sell the products you want to sell or the solutions or whatever it may be. The second is you actually achieve the financial goals you're trying to hit.
Yeah, I would echo what Robert said in terms of starting with the strategy for the company. And that's one of the things that we focused here on Qlik, is making sure that we have a strategy that the company understands. And then that serves as the basis for the annual planning cycle, and making sure we have a tight interlock across all the different functions in the company, including go to market. And so once the strategy is set, once the annual operating plan and the underlying targets are set, then there's really a focus on, okay, how are we going to get to the numbers? What is the go to market? And sales comp design fits right into that process, and making sure you start that early enough in the year. We're actually starting that process right now, so this discussion is very timely. That has been key as well. There's been other years where, for whatever reason, we might be a little bit further behind the curve, but starting that process early is critical to making sure that you have a successful launch of the plans, leading all the way up to when those actually get rolled out to the field. But part of that process also has to be getting the buy-in from the sales leaders early enough in the planning cycle. And that's where, for us, over the years, we've learned we need to get that buy-in early on, and to get feedback. And part of that is getting feedback not just from the leaders, but from the field and the sellers themselves in terms of what they like, what they don't like. And that really gives you kind of a framework as you move forward and make decisions.
I mean, it all resonates. So aligned to the strategy. Sometimes it gets just caught and forgotten because people get really tactical of, okay, am I going to cap this and what am I going to pay, right? And people forget of, okay, what are we trying to get to here, right? I think and then Dennis, your comment around starting early, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. I can't tell you sometimes, and I'm not going to name any names. We get a call in October 15th. Yeah, we want to roll out some new comp plans for a global organization of 5,000 people on January 1st. I'm like, okay. I think we're a little bit behind the eight ball here. So when you think about, sales compensation is important. The quotas, I think people get that, but they get stuck in their day job. So Dennis, just because you just mentioned it last, like how do you get people's attention to say, okay, it's July, we need to really be doing this. How to get people bought in? Because there are so many people in my experience that get brought in from sales, finance, HR, right? And it's sort of a tribe you have to bring together. And sometimes that's a challenge. I don't know if you share that or have any tricks of the trade of how to get them engaged early.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, there's a tone at the top, that at the executive level, that needs to be there, and for folks to understand, this is critical. At the end of the day, if sellers aren't motivated, if they don't understand their comp plans, if they don't understand how they're paid, then the entire financial plan is at risk. So that actually, to me, is pretty easy, making sure you get people's attention. But the other way we make sure we get the attention is we have a regular cadence of reviewing what's happening with sales compensation throughout the year. That was a process we started a couple of years back. We had some administrative struggles, and we put that in place as just a way to monitor what was happening. What were we hearing from the field? Were there administrative challenges? What are we seeing in terms of the outcome of the plan, which is really what you need to focus on, is what's actually happening ultimately. And that cadence helps drive throughout the year a focus that leads very naturally into the planning cycle that starts for us as a calendar year company right around this time of year. So if you're sort of focused on just, hey, this is a once a year exercise, then you're already sort of behind the eight ball. It has to just be ingrained in what you do day in, day out. And that has worked for us here at Qlik in terms of getting the organizational focus that it requires.
And taking one step back of what Dennis just said, because it cannot be underestimated how important it is to get field feedback on a sales comp plan, not only when it's running, but actually, to Dennis's point, when you're starting the comp plan design for the next year. Yes, of course, it has to be a top-down supported and communicated effort, because otherwise the buy-in is going to be very difficult. But during the design phase, try to find people who also will tell you this is how I'm going to behave versus this is what I want. The reason for that is very simple. We're standing in between a strategy and a salesperson that actually does the work. So we have to kind of filter, interpret, how is this going to work? And when we go through the reviews after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, you want to make sure that works right. It can't be something, for example, where the salesperson ends up with 15 metrics. That's just not going to work. Yeah. So keep it as simple as possible. Every VP, especially if you have multiple product VPs who are trying to influence the direction and the strategy, the core behind it, and this is our job when you're doing plan design, is keep it as simple as possible while driving the right behavior. And at the same time, to Dennis's point, monitor, monitor, monitor. I cannot say it enough that people often think comp plan and incentive comp is always backwards looking. Yes, the result is backward looking, but you can actually use it to forward look as well.
not a set it and forget it scenario, right? You got to really see what's going on. It's a living, breathing thing, right? Totally couldn't agree more. So in the chat, someone asks, "What's the greatest hurdle from getting buy-in?" Because I agree with this. Salespeople think as soon as you make a comp plan change, you're just taking money out of my pocket, right? So there's going to be resistance to change, right? So you mentioned getting their opinion. I think is one of the things, the tools that I've seen work very well. Do you have any other tricks of the trade to break down those barriers?
The first part is an empathy. A salesperson finances their own comp plan because we basically have an on target earning and we slice a variable component out of it, which we use to pay back based on the comp plan. So, an empathy towards that understanding gets a buy in from the seller who you're actually working with, that, oh, you understand this is about my money. So, it's not I don't want to pay you exercise. It is, I want to pay you and this is what I need you to do to get you paid. So it's a shift from, it's kind of like, if I take a penny out of your pocket, that feels bad. But if I am happy to give you the money, if you do what I'm asking you to do, it takes a completely different mindset in the discussion. And that goes through all levels of a sales organization because it changes the dynamics, as in it's not an us against them, it becomes a we. And when somebody says you're tough but fair, biggest compliment you can get. When it's like you're constantly trying to hinder us from making money, that's a bad starting point for any discussion. So, to the point again, multiple levels of the organization is what you want to have involved in the design process itself. They don't have to have the final word, but one needs to understand, what are they going to do when we put this plan in place.
I think that all makes sense, Robert. And what I would add again is coming back to getting the buy-in early on from sales leadership in the process and making sure they have a voice that is heard throughout the process, so that you address what sellers might not be happy with in the current plan structure, and then really demonstrating to them, look, here is how you can make money, and showing them and how that ties back to the overall company strategy. That's critical. There's a change management aspect to all of this that is super important as you roll plans out, and you're not going to be successful if you don't have the buy-in early on. And the sales leaders are really the ones that can help, because sellers, they might hear it from the CEO or the CFO or the CRO, but it's their individual managers, and then the folks above them that have to help sell the plans and help explain to them why those plans are the right plans and how they can be successful and make money. If you get that right, then you have a much greater likelihood of a successful rollout.
When you involve them in the process early, that starts to change management, where it feels like, hey, this isn't being done to me. I'm part of it, right? I think that's what I see. And then, Robert, we said about empathy is so critical. Is It's at risk pay, right? You hired me. You said I'm going to make 200 grand a year. I'm taking 50 grand of my money and I'm putting it on the table, right? It's not that, hey, I hired you, you get 200 grand base. You could get a bonus of 40 or 50 grand, but it's not, it's a bonus. It's not really, those are two different mindsets, right? And that's where the empathy really matters. Like, hey, that's my money I'm putting on the table, right? That that has a whole nother level of responsibility of listening, right? Those kinds of things. That's what, hopefully that helps some, the question of just how you do things matters, right? And how you approach them as human beings, that kind of thing. It's y'all are right on target. I think it's great. So there's a question here. I think another one is a good one. So I think it's a question around, what is the genesis point for and best practice for the starting point for creating your sales territories?
In an optimal scenario, your territory planning and assignment, your quota setting and planning, and your comp system itself are all in one. And the other side that we might come to later, i.e., the true sort of modeling and predictive analytics with it. Preferably, if you have everything in one system, it makes your life a lot easier, for the simple reason there's no passover. It is a congruent sort of picture overall, because the interdependencies are so big that if I do my territory planning over here, but I might do my quota planning over there, it may or may not actually match. So we've all seen it happen where you get very obscure quotas or very obscure territories if those things are not done in an attached and sort of coupled fashion.
Sounds like Dennis is agreeing as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm always an advocate of simplicity. So when you have multiple systems and things in different places, you end up with a much more siloed approach. So that is the journey that we're on as well, in terms of trying to get to one place where we're doing territory planning and quota allocations, and not just doing them in Excel, but actually in the system, and making that much more efficient.
So, I mean, that's why I joined Forma, is that we have one data model. We have those three modules of comp, it's territory, quota, and then analytics. So we agree. And I think the only thing I might add to the great conversation is I think they both have their strengths, right? So if you use the comp system, it's downstream of what happened and why, sort of the tail lights, right? your CRM system have what could be out there. But I think another key thing is the true potentialization for the bottoms up. So your CRM might not be a true representation of the total addressable market. So if you have a system that can bring all those things together, right, I think it's a combined, you're conducting an orchestra band there to make sure you get the points of view, what's possible, what do I think I can get through the CRM, what has history said, and then you can begin to balance territories, use that as a leveraging point to set quotas, et cetera. And if they're in the same system, then obviously, to Robert's point, you don't have to worry about, oh, well, we changed, a definition or something, or we had a lag in the data replication, and you don't have the same sheet of music, right? So this is a great question, follow-up question I'd love to ask both of you is, what do you feel is the toughest to get right? Is it getting the simple aligned comp plan? Is it setting fair, attainable quotas that drive a good performance distribution and pays out when the company makes their numbers? Or is it trying to balance and set territories so sellers are set up and understand what they're supposed to go after and why? Do you see, are all those things just as difficult, equally difficult, one easier than the other? What are your thoughts on that?
They're all difficult, but I would say getting quotas right, because the implications of getting them wrong, and exactly what you just described, Shawn, which is you end up with folks that are either performing and selling a lot but not making money because the quota was set too high, or vice versa, quotas were set too low or just not distributed the right way across the base of sellers. And so you're not hitting your numbers, but your compensation is going through the roof, right? That's the worst thing that can happen. So it's easy to say, but it's much easier said than done in terms of how you set those quotas. We've tried to put a lot of rigor into our quota setting process to make sure that we're staring at those quotas, that they're fair and balanced. I think Robert said it well earlier. At the end of the day, we're striving for fairness. I want sellers to make as much money as possible, and if we do all these things the right way, and they should be able to make their money, and the company is successful as well in terms of hitting its targets. So that's the part that I think is, for me, the toughest out of those three areas to get right.
Yeah, the way I always see it is it's a three-legged stool. If you get one wrong, the other two will fall apart as well. The most impactful if you get it wrong, obviously, where it becomes also difficult to tweak and adjust, and it creates the most anxiety among sellers, is the quota itself, because it is the first thing they see. So three-legged stool, you get one wrong, the other two will fall apart. You get quota wrong, still everything falls apart, but it is immediately visible to the seller. You get the territory wrong, it'll take them a few minutes to figure that out. You get the plan wrong, it'll take us a few minutes to see, are they doing what we want them to do? You get the quota wrong, that's, sellers are smart. We sometimes underestimate how quick they are. They know their territory, they know their accounts, so they know what the general potential is. And to what you just said, in a great system, what you have is not just the attainment, but you pull in the pipeline, you pull in the total addressable market. So you basically offer it up to the salesperson, as in, here's your potential. And if you see a quota that is way out of whack, then you've got an immediate problem.
Yeah, I think it's all very comfortable. I like to, in slang, like to say, my comp plan says, what could I make? My territory is what I should make, and my quota is what will I make. The quota actually becomes the most potentially negative of it all, because you could give me a simple plan, measure me on TCV bookings, give me an uncapped plan, right? And then, but I'm gonna give you, because it's uncapped, I'm gonna give you a 50% threshold before you're in the money. And then you give me my quota, and if all the stars align, the best I can do is get to 40%. I don't care about all that good stuff. I'm not making any money, right? So it all falls apart pretty quickly. So I think it's interesting you say that. And Dennis, it's great to hear from a CFO's point of view as well, because usually I like to say sales are from Venus and finance is from Mars, and it's too easy, it's too hard, right? But I think that's awesome.
Absolutely. So one thing that you just said actually just reminded me of something, and that is also one of the things as plan design working together with finance. When you calculate your budget and you say this is your overall budget for commissions for the year, that should be based on an average attainment of 100%. I've had many discussions where the company then said, oh, no, we should have an average attainment of 75%. That is I'll call it not a great culture that you're driving there, because you're basically setting a large majority of the salespeople up for failure. That has short legs with respect to the duration of your salespeople. And a lot of us have products that are not easy to sell. So if you're trying to do that, you're driving a turnover culture, as opposed, because I'm either very successful or I belly flop and I just don't make money. And as a salesperson, that doesn't work.
Yeah, obviously, if you end up with high attrition, if you think about how you set quotas, if you don't get this right, all these things, the account assignments, the territories, the quota, the comp plan, and your attrition starts to spike, and we monitor our attrition every month. If that number starts to creep up beyond what you expected coming into the year, then obviously your likelihood of hitting the numbers is really slim. So obviously all this stuff sort of fits together, and making sure that sellers understand the decisions that have been made, that they're motivated by the comp plan, their quota, and that they feel like they can be successful. Generally speaking, if sellers think they can be successful and can make money, then they're gonna stay. But if you get that wrong, then you're gonna have a whole different problem to deal with.
Couldn't agree more. Would you give any advice just getting the CFO management's attention on this, that this is worthy of investment time, right? Planning early, that kind of thing.
I think living through periods of time where you don't get it right, where the comp plans are not designed the right way, or you're getting some undesired outcome. If you don't learn the hard way, I'm not sure how you're going to learn. But the CFOs should understand the magnitude of how important this is, and what can happen if you get it wrong. I mean, it's just for a lot of things we've already talked about. If sellers start leaving, if they don't feel motivated, if they're happy to just sort of collect base pay for some period of time, then the overall financial plan is going to fall apart pretty quickly. And if you're a CFO, that's how you're measured ultimately. So all this stuff ties together. And yeah, I think for the most part, most CFOs probably understand this is one of the most important things. And it's one of the things that over time I've tried to get closer and closer to, particularly the administrative aspect of it and what can happen if you don't get that right. That's sort of just table stakes in terms of making sure that there's not a lot of open tickets, that reps understand they get a statement that is readable and understandable and accurate and complete, that they're being paid timely, that there's not payment errors. Once that stuff starts happening, and we've gone through different periods where that stuff kind of spiked for different reasons and complexities, then you really start to lose the hearts and minds of the sellers. And they're it's kind of just basics, but they're not focused on what they need to be focused on, which is selling. We know they have a hard job as it is, and if they're spending time on administrative tasks, there's only so many hours in a day. They get frustrated and distracted, and because it's as Robert said, it's their money, right? So you have to get that right. You have to respect that, and that's that to me is something that any CFO needs to be close to and understand how their team is staying on top of that, and that the functions staffed properly, that they have the right tools, and that there's the right governance and oversight across the executive team to make sure that all the right things are happening in that regard.
Yeah, in my career, maybe I've just been extremely lucky in the sense that the CFO always had a vested interest in comp for two major reasons. Number one, to Dennis's point, if a salesperson doesn't do what you need him to do, then the CFO won't make their target either. So that hits everything from quota setting to, are the financials actually running in the right direction? The second part is the CFO is, of course, interested in what is the cost going to be, because it can't be a runaway train. So it's the balance between the two. You make sure you're only successful together. We're not going to leave HR out, because it's actually that. So the operations side, the HR side, the finance side, and all of us sort of in a circle who have to work together. From a financial perspective, if you get one wrong, the other one will go wrong too. And then the company doesn't make the money, or you pay way too much money. And so that's why, to earlier mentioned, you got to monitor as it goes along.
So if I were to try to recap it, because some industries, we go outside, you go into like manufacturing, et cetera, where you got supply chains and other, and when you're not making your numbers, the easy trip, right? Okay, something's wrong. A lot of times we look at, okay, what about the supply chain? What about brand management, et cetera? And then sometimes sales, doesn't bubble up to the top. But if you are making a number, you should look at your sales and look at two things. You have a regrettable turnover. So are you losing people you don't want to lose? Or even do you have complacency, which is tougher to figure out, right? So if the salespeople are complacent, i.e., they're not putting in the full effort, those are maybe some ways to begin people to maybe adjust their thinking, is what I sort of took away from that great dialogue. Is that a fair distillation?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So the question is if you have Excel and you're using it and supported with other tools like Power BI, Tableau, Qlik, those types of solutions, what was the tipping point to justify getting an automation solution? So was it a number of people? Was it something else? What made you make the investment?
Having lived through the transformation from Excel to a system in my past life, if you try to do everything in Excel, there is a limit, there is a ceiling as to how far you can go. You might be able to do it for 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 sellers, but at some point in time, it's just not possible. And you run into a brick wall. That is, our expertise in Excel is just, well, we might be smart enough, but the risk you take, because remember, Excel, anybody can edit it. You copy your formula down, but you forgot the last cell. So it's just the risk of making mistakes, number one. And number two, a lot of us, especially in public companies, we're required to be SOX compliant, SOC 1, type 1 and 2, SOC 2, type 1 and 2. So all those things in Excel are impossible. Even in Power BI, you're going to start running into problems. So you need a system that not only does the calculations right, but also fulfills all of the financial and sort of, I'll call them auditing requirements at the same time. And those have become increasingly difficult, much more difficult than, say, 20, 30 years ago. So in Excel, it's not going to get that far. I mean, you might get away with it for a smaller team where there's not as much oversight. In our companies, no, that's just not possible.
Yeah, and I know from a compensation system standpoint, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been with Qlik for 16 years. We're about $1.5 billion in revenue annually. When I joined, we were 150 million, and the company just at that time was putting in a compensation tool. So it's been that long that we've had something, and we were also looking to go public. So to Robert's point, you can't get very far and start, especially if you're growing quickly and if you're adding reps quickly, the way Qlik has over the years, you have to have some type of system. And it's the administrative aspect, but it's also for the sellers not getting an Excel statement that has to get pushed out, but having access to a system where they can go in and look and see their transactions and actually understand, what it is that they're looking at and tie that back to what they're getting paid each period.
Important point there, what Dennis just said, which is 24/7 access to a dashboard where the seller can see this is where I am, this is when I get to 100% of my quota, this is when I get to go to club. All those parameters are what motivates a seller. I mean, not the only ones, obviously, but it is important for them to see it. And when you get towards the end of the year, if you watch the frequency as to how many times they actually check where they are, it goes from, maybe once a month at the beginning of the year, once a week, and then it's multiple times per day. So they want to see things come in. So, and it's for a very good reason. We want them to do that. They should be interested in hitting 100% because that's when we can basically say it was a successful year.
Well, in a certain place should motivate, right? So you want to maximize motivation. If I don't have any visibility where I am, I lose a lot of motivational power, right? So I think it's an awesome, tremendous point. And then I think, so all those things you just mentioned in terms of operations, right? Managing risk on, compliance, having the right accuracy, I think are all good. I'd also offer, it matters on your top side. So again, if you're using to motivate, right, and even if you got 50 reps and you're doing 65 million, if you can increase your performance by 10% because people are motivated to all these points too, there's an upside there. And that, so I wouldn't also, I would say, do you need a critical mass? Probably makes sense. But if you view it as strategic and you can drive both downside on the cost and risk, and then a drive upside, that's a compelling, if you view, again, it goes back to, if you view this as a strategic lever to drive true performance. And so it shouldn't just be like a tripping point, I have a number of reps, et cetera, in my opinion, because you can get value out of it.
Additional point with Excel versus having a system and a dashboard where I can check. If I'm using Excel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log every single deal that I have. I'm going to keep them in a spreadsheet separate, and then I compare two spreadsheets. So the amount of time I waste as a seller versus I have a system that basically shows me exactly what I got paid for, that's going to take me a few minutes versus hours of comparing and tracking and noting. So it's not just an operational effort from our side, quote unquote, that is significantly simplified in the SOX compliance and everything else, but it's also on the seller side that they don't waste as much time trying to verify I got this deal, that deal, and keep things in spreadsheets separate, because that is not a great idea.
Another great point. You want to minimize the shadow accounting, right? That's just lost productivity time. So when you think about, so we talked about some of the most difficult things that came up in terms of quota, I think was one of them. So to double back and circle back on that, what do you think is the next best thing? Because again, we're thinking this is a journey. That you mentioned 16 years, right? You've been at this, right, and making improvements, learning, right, as you go along. What was the next second biggest challenge you would say that was presented?
Well, I've talked about administrative challenges. I think those are things that once they start happening, it takes a while to get that fixed, right? Even if there's a lot of attention. So you have to sort of manage the field and help them understand that you're trying to fix those things and that you will fix them and people will get paid timely and properly. But that, there's a lot of organizational effort that goes into that to get things where they need to be. I would say that, once you get that fixed, then that is just, should just sort of run on its own. You obviously have to make sure the team is staffed well, and you have the right skill sets to make sure that the trains keep running on time each month. But the other thing I would say that is a challenge that every year comes up is, as we talked about, you need to keep the plans pretty simple. You can't have, I think Robert said it earlier, you don't want too many metrics, but there's always a number of things that the company is trying to accomplish. So the challenge to me is as you go into the design cycle every year is sort of how do you take all these different things we want to have occur to drive our success, but sort of distill them down into a comp plan that is easy to understand for the seller. And that requires a lot of work across the different functions. And there's always, one function might be saying, well, wait a minute, now we've over rotated and now sellers aren't focused on this. And because you guys are just setting up the plan so that they get paid this way. So that's a challenge every year, is trying to find that right balance. And we've had those struggles, I think, like most companies. How do you get that right? It's not easy, but you need to spend a lot of time cross-functionally saying whether it's the right weighting, or what are the metrics maybe that we're going to not put into the plan because we think by putting these other metrics in, those will happen quite naturally. And then to me, one of the most important things, you can't manage everything through a compensation plan. So there's a cultural aspect to this as well, in terms of sales management and making sure that they're focused on the right things and they're doing their job as sales leaders to get the sellers to do what they need to do, and not just, sellers they'll take the comp plan, they'll take it very literally and say, okay, this is what you told me to go do, and that's what I'm going to go do. But you have to balance that with not having too much in the comp plan. So you really need to rely on the leaders to drive the right management behaviors to address everything else that you can't squeeze into a comp plan, because if you do, it'll make it too complex. So I think just getting all of that right is never easy. There's always things that come up after you roll the plans out and you see, Jesus isn't working properly. How are we going to fix that next year? But you're always striving for simplicity at the same time.
Adding to what Dennis said, let's just assume we got all that right. The next big pain point that one has to get under control is what I refer to as rogue comp. And what I mean by that is not actually comp plan, but people putting spiffs in place. Exactly. Oh boy. To Dennis's point, you have somebody who said, well, you over pivoted here, so I want something to help there. If a seller can make more money qualifying for spiffs than they can on their own comp plan, or if you get too many spiffs, it becomes so distracting. So one of the things I highly recommend is pull anything and everything related to spiffs into the comp team, so it is actually controlled, governed, and approved there, as opposed to allowing sales leaders to do it on their own. It doesn't mean you're not doing them. It just means we're not overloading a seller with 7, 8, 9, 10 individual spiffs where they're inconsistent, they contradict one another. Yeah, sure. On an individual, looking at each one of them, they make sense. But in the summary, it just sends people in rogue different directions. And so that's one of the things we always start with, quote unquote, after we've gotten the rest right, is like bring that in and make sure they don't misuse spiffs for anything and everything that comes up as, oh, we didn't cover this in the comp plan, let's throw a spiff at it. You're like, no, that doesn't work.
You want to maintain some flexibility within your budget to be able to run spiffs from time to time, because things will come up, especially when you're building an annual compensation plan. Looking out 3 months, there's enough complexities that'll arise, let alone what's going to happen by the time we get to the fourth quarter. But those need to be kept, as Robert said, very tight. You don't want to have too many. It just becomes more confusing. Again, it contradicts the whole concept of simplicity that we've talked about throughout this discussion. And really having that at the right governance level for us. Those things, the CEO weighs in, I weigh in, the CRO, they go all the way up to the top of the organization, and even in terms of getting, if it's incremental funding outside of the budget, making sure that the board is aware of any type of material spiff that we might run. All that governance, I think, helps make sure that process maintains integrity and hopefully drives the right outcome, which is improving bookings beyond whatever it is that you're forecasting at the moment.
So I'm smiling a little bit. So agree on all those points. The spiffs, obviously you got to be very judicious with spiffs and make sure they're aligned and be as proactive as you can. Do you have any reaction to what you would consider an effective spiff?
You don't want to pay for more for something that already sells itself. So that's a key. So the area where we use spiffs most is, I have a niche product, I have a new product, I have an area I want to focus on that otherwise, in the grand scheme of things, is even with others, but I need more focus on it. And so to kickstart the business, I'll bring in a spiff for 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year if it's needed, but try not to do it again and again and again. Basically do it until it runs. And then it runs on its own, because then people see the value of it and they say, okay, I can do this. I know how to do this. If I sell this, it helps me make my quota. And so it becomes a more simple and sort of, I'll call it, it's a trigger in the brain where people go, yeah, I just include it to my overall portfolio. You sometimes need to kick it. What I always recommend don't doing is, if you have a product that's more expensive, for example, you don't need to put a spiff in place because it's already expensive. So every seller will say, I can make $100 here, but I can make $300 there. That's kind of like, okay, they do a weighting between effort and what I get back. So if you have something that is very difficult that pays more, you actually start balancing it with, I need 10 of the ones that are easy. So I make a little bit of my base of portion of the quota, but I'm going to go after a couple of these elephants because that will actually get me over the hump and over the 100, which comes back to what Dennis said before. Putting quotas together is not a trivial exercise. You actually have to think about what is in the quota. What does it constitute? What are the components that actually lead to a number? It's not just, hey, this is the renewal and I want you to do 20% growth. There's a little more science that has to go into it.
It all comes back to you want to get the field motivated and excited when you roll those out. So they have to look at those fifths and say, okay, I can make considerably more money if I go out and do what the company's asking me to do here. So they can take different shapes and form, but to me, it's an important tool to have as you work throughout the year, because again, there's going to be things that come up, and it could be that performance is lagging behind. So how do we make sure that they stay focused? How do we make sure that reps can still see a path to making their OT or beyond, hopefully, and that you don't end up in a situation where there's misalignment between the company's success and the seller's success, one way or the other. So there's different, for us, sometimes it's product or a type of license model that we're trying to drive a stronger mix, and we're willing to pay more. Sometimes it might be duration on deals. Sometimes it's just, hey, larger deals, which might motivate the seller to say, hey, I can go out and maybe I can get this $150,000 opportunity. I can work a little harder, bumping up below the threshold where I'm going to get a kicker on my commission rate, right? And that's the type of stuff that is self-funding, that you minimize that risk, that you roll out a spiff, and as Robert said, you just basically pay more for what you were going to just get anyway. That's obviously the last thing that you want when you roll out a spiff.
And in addition to monetary, never, ever, ever underestimate the limelight effect of, say, a contest. It doesn't always have to be specifically a contest too. That being called out at the sales kickoff, always well appreciated.
By nature, these are very competitive people, right? So that's 100% spot on. Is that recognition element is important as well.
For sure. When you hire naturally intrinsically motivated people, right? There are different ways to pull the lever. Money's not the only way. We completely agree, right? Just the recognition, or even that's where gamification is coming up. It's not, so you get the lunch, or you might have, a cheesy, sort of cheesy, recognition of, hey, you're a platinum seller, right? There's all different kinds of things. And they seem sometimes, I know, because I've presented some of these ideas, be like, what do you mean? Like, especially for the younger generation, really, they level up. So I think those are tremendous points. So Dennis, you mentioned something I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper on. So when you overcame some of the sales comp admin challenges, was it more because of the technology, the process of the administration, who does what, the people that were involved with the process? Where was the root cause when you look back and said, okay, here's why I had those challenges and what I solved?
Yeah, it was all of the above. I think there were system challenges, and not the commission system per se, but even we had launched a new ERP the year before, and I think we had a new team of people that had come in and exited very quickly, and some decisions were made around design that operationally we weren't able to support, and so it really created just an administrative mess in terms of being able to pay accurately, and that is obviously something that just can't happen, and it's difficult to fix on the fly. But then the focus that went into making sure that got rectified, and now we've had several years of far smoother performance in that regard. But it's a tough lesson learned, but also something I think in terms of making sure we stay on our toes going forward is it helps where we are today. We at one point had, this goes back 3 or 4 years, but we had like 300-400 open tickets, inquiries from sellers in terms of what was happening with commissions, and today we have a biweekly call, and if I get on that call and there's more than 3 open questions in the field, that's a lot, right? And we'll kind of joke about just how far we've come, but that's the way it should be, and it should just be like very rapid. People will have questions from time to time, but you need to respond quickly. You need to dispose of those inquiries very quickly, and I think just the rigor that we've put in, we've removed that friction from the process.
From an operational perspective, we've been extremely lucky over the years that it's worked really well. One of the key things there, I would say, is please don't underestimate how complicated it is actually in the back end, i.e. integrating with your ERP system, the flows, the processes. Spend the time to detail it. It's painful. It's strenuous. It will cost you sleep, but the reward, to Dennis's point, is you actually sleep a lot better later because you don't have 300, 400 questions per month. And the seller actually has a level of trust in it. So when you do implement a system, take the time to do it right. And that's not easy because those processes, those systems, the data exchange between them, be it your HR system, your CRM system, your ERP system or systems, multiple can be, is something where you truly need to pay attention to get it right. So whoever does it, make sure they also understand comp, because it is not just a technical integration. There's also a philosophical idea behind what comp does. And that is often underestimated as to how much time you need and how much detail you need to document there.
And those folks have to be plugged in at the very beginning of the design process. So we have them every step of the way, because as soon as somebody at my level or a colleague of mine on the leadership team, they might say, well, we need to do this, and we need to pay reps for doing this, right? And then the first question we've learned to ask is, well, operationally, can we do that? And we have, over the years, I've had a bad habit of saying, we'll go figure it out, because usually we do figure it out. And there's somebody in the background that is a hero who goes and figures it out. But when it comes to you need to be operationally sound, and you might have to go do that work before you roll the plans out, but that has to get the right prioritization and funding to make sure that stuff is automated, because if you're relying on a couple people in the background to do stuff manually, you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. And for example, we were talking about quotas earlier. If I have a plan where I can't break out the quota or basically credit because the ERP doesn't provide it, well, that's a problem. Right. So this is why it's more complicated than people may think at the sort of the surface level. The devil's in the detail, where you don't have to be a technical implementation person to design comp plans, but you have to appreciate the fact that you need to work together to determine what is actually possible.
That's awesome. So besides run, I'm kidding, I guess, what would you say to yourself that you know now when you first started this journey? Again, you can't say run.
Mm-hmm. I think just alignment across the executive team and the different functions. From a design standpoint, that's going to be critical, and linkage to the strategy. We talked about that at the very beginning, that the strategy sort of, that sets the direction for the annual planning cycle, and then the go-to-market needs to support that annual planning cycle, and then the comp design. And again, as I've said a couple of times, that phrase again, the administration is just table stakes, right? But making sure all that is linked and that you start early enough in the process. I mean, that's what I have learned throughout this, my course of time at the company, and seeing different phases that the company's been through. Starting that process early and having the right collaboration across the teams is super important.
Yeah, and adding to that, the one thing I always say when we go through the meetings is incentive comp in itself is not a strategy, and it will never replace a corporate strategy. So it's one of the things comp people have heard many times in their lives. Somebody comes and sales manager says, I've got the new person starting. I want to pay him this way. So what role am I supposed to put him in? Red flag, right? So it comes back to make sure that the initial steps are taken, because otherwise your comp plan will not be able to fix. It's often enough asked to, but it cannot fix upstream issues or sales management issues or other components. It's one of the biggest mistakes we've all fallen into, because we thought, oh yeah, we can fix it. And then we figure out the hard way, that's not going to work. That just crashes.
I want to give you a sincere thank you for your time, your insights. I very much enjoyed it. I learned some stuff today too. I hope the audience shares some of that. And thank you, audience. And again, I hope everybody has a great day. Safe travels back home, Robert. Dennis, I hope you have a good rest of the day. And again, many thanks for your time.
The Sales Compensation Show is brought to you by Forma AI, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma AI, visit our website at forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.